Hey everyone. It has been widely noted that this election cycle is a disgrace. I'm hardly the first person to think that. But today I'd like to talk a little bit about why I think it's a disgrace. My perspective is a little bit different than the conventional one. Winston Churchill famously said that democracy is the worst form of government, except when you consider all the others. And what he meant by that is two things. First, that democracy is the best form of government. And second of all, that despite that, democracy is precarious, it's fragile, and it has an inherent flaw. And that inherent flaw is that it depends mightily on the goodness and the wisdom of the people within the democracy. If those people are good and wise, the democracy will flourish. If they are not, the democracy will suffer greatly. So relatively speaking, we live in a prosperous democracy. However, we've seen people countenance slavery over a period of centuries. We've seen people support Jim Crow segregation for decades. We've seen virtually every new ethnic group come into the country and experience discrimination. The bottom line is a democracy is only as good as the people who support that democracy. And that brings us to the topic of Donald Trump. When Trump first came out and told us that the Mexican government was sending us rapists and murderers, I thought that was going to be the end of his campaign. Because not only was the Mexican government not sending us anybody, most of the people that were coming into this country aren't even Mexican. They're people that are fleeing war-torn Central America. And I assumed that people would pick up on that and shun Donald Trump. Quite to the contrary, his popularity went up. When he told us that he watched thousands and thousands of Muslims celebrating after 9/11 in Jersey City, I assume when every news organization checked its file footage and could find no evidence that any large group of people celebrated anywhere in New Jersey, that people would dismiss Donald Trump as a crackpot. His popularity went up. When he retweeted the statistic that 81% of murders against whites are done by blacks, a completely bogus statistic. I thought that Donald Trump would become a laughingstock, a presidential candidate who spends his time retweeting internet hoaxes. After that tweet, he went on Bill O'Reilly, and O'Reilly, to his credit, called Donald on it and said, "Why are you retweeting this?" Donald's response was, "Vintage Trump. What, am I supposed to check every statistic?" I'm frankly not shocked by anything that Donald Trump does. I've watched him over a period of decades. So I am infinitely more shocked by Donald Trump's supporters than I am by Donald Trump. The third rail of American discourse is that you can never criticize the electorate. Why? Politicians can't criticize the electorate because they need the electorate to get elected. And pundits tend not to criticize the electorate because they need those people to patronize them, whether it's watching their TV shows or reading their blogs or whatever. To the extent that politicians are corrupt or hypocritical or foolish, they're there because we put them there. The sad truth is, Donald Trump has managed to amass a large group of supporters within the Republican Party who are bigoted. Now, the all-purpose apology, the all-purpose rationalization that both politicians and pundits make for Donald Trump supporters is they're angry. They've been let down. They've been let down by the conservatives who they put into office. Well, what are they angry about exactly? Well, they're angry that the Republicans did not stop Obamacare. Really? They're angry that 18 million new people have health insurance? They're angry that the notion of a pre-existing condition is now a relic of the past? They're angry that large numbers of people now have preventive care, where their only source of medical care previously was in an emergency room after they were sick? That's what they're angry about? I mean, that's an amazing thought. Well, it's not just Obamacare. They're angry that marriage should be between a man and a woman. Really? Angry? There's nothing self-validating about being angry. There's nothing inherently admirable about being angry. The Taliban is angry. They're angry about little girls wanting to go to school and learn how to read. They're angry about women who want to assume public office. They're angry about people wanting to vote. There's nothing righteous or laudable about that anger. Donald Trump seems to be able to get people to take positions against their own interests. Case in point, how is it that Trump has any female supporters at all? Let's look at the case of Megyn Kelly. In the first debate, Kelly brings up some quotes of Donald Trump about women and asks him to explain them. Trump's first reaction is to deny that he ever said those things. He then switches virtually mid-sentence and says, well, actually, I only said them about Rosie O'Donnell. And then he doesn't have a good explanation for why he has such a record of saying abusive things about women. After the debate, he's still so embarrassed by the exchange with Kelly, he proceeds to bully her and get his supporters to participate in trying to bully her online. Now, time has shown us that Kelly is 100 times better as a moderator of debates than Donald Trump is as a debater. She's been nothing but professional and first-rate throughout this process. And yet, women are still willing to defend Donald Trump against Megyn Kelly. It's one of the most bizarre scenarios I've ever seen. In another frightening example, Trump recently gave a foreign relations speech at AIPAC, the American-Israeli Public Affairs Committee. And it was extremely scary to see Jewish Americans standing up and cheering this proto-fascist while he attacked Barack Obama. It was so strange that the director of AIPAC, Lillian Pincus, came out and apologized for it the next day because the whole image was so unseemly. Now, one of the things that pundits ponder about Trump is, well, is he going to pivot? Is he going to, tomorrow, the next day, maybe the week after that, become more presidential? And I think I have the answer to that question. No. And the reason I say no is because Donald Trump is incapable of pivoting. The thing to note about Trump is that he has no censor. He has no filter. And so he's incapable of preventing himself from saying outrageous and largely untrue things. Trump, when he feels anxious and threatened, simply blurts things out. He can't help himself. And so he's left the next day to try to clean up what he said. Case in point, after the Kelly affair, he made the statement about blood coming out of her, whatever. We all know what he meant by that. And he spent the next week trying to protest that that's not what he meant. When Trump was confronted with critical remarks that John McCain had made about him, that was when he blurted out his famous statement that he preferred veterans who had not been captured in war, as if they're somehow better than people who were POWs. And it was the same feeling of stress and anxiety that caused him to foolishly and cruelly send out that unflattering picture of Ted Cruz's wife. A more contemptible move I have almost never seen from a political candidate, particularly since Cruz had nothing to do with the picture that had been sent out of Trump's wife. This was an unusually vile act, even for Donald Trump. And if his supporters had any decency whatsoever, they would abandon him immediately. Not so. When Trump was stressed because his claim about seeing thousands and thousands of people in Jersey City celebrating after 9/11 had been exposed as a fabrication, that was when he chose to mock the New York Times writer with the neurological disorder. Donald Trump can't help himself. If the supporters of Donald Trump had any decency whatsoever, they would abandon him in droves. They don't. And when I look back on file footage of those 9 kids who integrated Central High School back in the 50s, I often wonder about the people who stood on the sidelines shouting obscenities at them and cursing at them. When people see that old file footage today, do they feel any sense of remorse or shame about what they did? Or how about the people at the turn of the 20th century who amused themselves by sending postcards through the mail with pictures of lynchings? It's my view that we need to not only hold politicians accountable for their behavior, we need to hold their supporters accountable for their behavior. And I'll close with a couple interesting anecdotes. I've mentioned the integration of Central High School in Little Rock in 1957. And the governor in that case, who offered massive resistance to the idea of integration, was Orville Faubus. And long after all the turmoil had ended in Arkansas and integration had taken place, Faubus was asked by an enterprising journalist, Governor Faubus, what if you had simply allowed the integration of these schools without resisting, without Eisenhower having to bring in the National Guard? What do you think would have happened? He said, well, integration would have taken place more smoothly, but you would never have heard of me again because I would never have been reelected. There's a chilling thought. Here's another one. We all think of George Wallace, the Alabama governor, as an avowed segregationist and racist. But in his first electoral contest in 1958, George Wallace was the progressive in the race. He opposed the Ku Klux Klan, and while he was a segregationist, because you had to be in Alabama in those days, he was very soft on that issue compared to his opponent. Well, you know what happened? Wallace lost the race. And when asked to explain his loss, he later said, I got out-niggered by my opponent, and I'll never get out-niggered again. And sure enough, he jumped to the right, down in the gutter with the electorate, and became the demagogue that we now think of. So don't just blame Donald. Blame the people. I'm Jeff Rowan. Thanks for watching.